My name is Michael, and I'm the Inside Communications Director for Human San Quentin. The contents of this episode include strong language and graphic descriptions of violent crimes that may include sexual assault. This podcast is intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
What happens when you come face to face with the person who shattered your innocence? Today, we bring you a gripping and deeply personal conversation with Tristan, a survivor who made the unimaginable decision to confront his past head on. For years, he carried a haunting sense that something was wrong. Memories buried beneath confusion, silence, and pain. But in his early 30s, Tristan did what most could never fathom. He sat down across from the very cousin who had assaulted him. In this raw and unfiltered episode, Tristan recounts the moment he finally demanded answers. The tension, the flood of memories, and the weight of looking his abuser in the eye. He walks us through the years of pain that led to his confrontation and the surprising emotions that surfaced in the process. Was it closure? Was it justice? Or was it something far more complicated? This isn't just a story about trauma. It's about resilience, courage, and the pursuit of healing in the most unexpected ways. Sit with us as Tristan shares his journey, his reckoning, and what it really means to reclaim your own power. So welcome today, Tristan. We're happy to have you, and we're looking forward to hearing your story.
Yeah, well, thank you. First off, I feel super privileged to be here. It's been quite a journey over the last, I'd say, 2.5 years or so to kind of be at this point where I feel like I can openly talk about my story. But at the same time, I'm realizing I'm still trying to figure out my story, if that makes any sense. And I feel like one of the powers in sharing is each time I share, I feel like I glean a little bit more about what that story looks like and how it defines me. I grew up in Southern California, lived in a neighboring city to my cousin. I want to say my cousin is about 14 or 15 years older than me. I'm not 100% sure on that. But there's a big enough age gap there. My cousin was kind of the cool cousin, tried to kind of fill the role of, just like a fun hangout with you sort of cousin. My mom encouraged that a lot. And so I'd hang out with my cousin a lot. Probably, I have this little picture of us playing with Duplo Legos when I was probably like 1.5 or 2 that I have looked at and reflected on a lot. But anyway, my cousin probably was one of my favorite people. And he started molesting me. I want to say he says it probably started when I was 2 or 3. I don't have memory of that per se. I remember, I'd say the first recollections I have of when he was molesting me, I was probably maybe 8 or 9. And he'd take me camping, or I'd spend the night over at his house. And I just kind of grew to this point where I felt just very uncomfortable about things and tried to voice that to my mom. And she never, I don't think she really understood. Kind of would always be like, oh, he's so fun or whatever. And my cousin says there was probably around 50 incidences of individual molestation. So, I estimate that was probably at least once every month or two for probably my childhood. Probably around the time I was 12 or 13, maybe a little bit younger. No, I was definitely younger than that. My cousin ended up getting a job at a Christian youth camp, and he kind of moved away, lived farther away. And I kind of just forgot about things, if that makes sense. But they're still kind of in the back of my mind. He ended up inviting me up to go to one of the camps that he had worked at. I remember not wanting to go. And my mom kind of tells an interesting version of this story where she, I think to this day, feels kind of bad for kind of convincing me to go. But anyway, I ended up going to that camp. I was probably, I don't honestly know. I have this timeline I've blocked out so many memories of my childhood, which is why I feel like every time I tell my story, I'm just like, I'm finding something else out about myself that I didn't know before. I was probably like 11. Um, my cousin thinks I was maybe a little bit younger than that, but I don't actually know. Anyway, so I went up to this camp, and that was the last time that I know he molested me. Maybe as a funny side note, I remember bringing my little pocket knife as a little kid. I had this just little Swiss Army pocket knife sort of thing. And I had in my mind that I was going to cut off his penis or whatever. I don't know the appropriate word to say in a podcast. But I so was just going to cut that off if he tried anything. And I totally didn't do that. And I totally chickened out. And to this day, I think to myself, what would have happened had I pulled that knife out? Like, anyway, so he molested me there. He tried one more time. And I think I was old enough where I just said, no, like, that's not happening. I'm not doing that. And then he never tried again. And I think I forgot about it. I just kind of forgot. I have an ability to push things out of my mind and just not remember them. All of my childhood memories that I can really piece together are pretty traumatic. I have very few positive childhood memories that I can really pull from. But anyway, I was probably 14. I ended up meeting some friends, and one of the friends told me that they were molested as a child. I don't know why they told me that or anything, but it just kind of brought all these memories just flooded back into my mind. And I was trying to like sort it out and process it, and like part of me was like, is this real? Like, how did these things happen to me? Right around that same time, my cousin was like, he called me up out of the blue and was like, I'm going to get married and I want you to be a groomsman, is I think what it was. I remember just like freaking out about that. Like, oh my gosh, I haven't seen this person in a few years. Like, I'm having all these thoughts that I'm trying to put together, and I'm not even sure like what's real at this point and what's just fake. And like I just don't know. I like it's anyway, I remember hearing his voice for the first time in a few years. And I pretended I was asleep. My mom came in with the phone to try to like I was in my room and I just pretended I was asleep. And I remember hearing his voice and was like, oh my gosh, all of this is so real. I remember going to the shower afterwards because I was like, I can't let my mom see me cry. I was just so afraid. And I remember taking a shower and just like curling up in a little ball sitting there, like just totally lost it. And somehow, by the grace of God, I was able to like put myself back together and just like pretend that everything was okay, and, get out of the shower and whatever. Anyway, I was on a camp out. I did Boy Scouts growing up. One of the assistant scout masters, he was a young guy. He's pretty cool. We all thought he was the cool guy or whatever. We were just on a camp out, and I just decided to tell him. I was like, "Hey, these are some things." And he was probably like, I don't know, 25 at the oldest, sort of thing. And like, I don't think he had any experience in anything like this, and he had no idea how to respond. He told one of the older kind of adults, was like, "Hey, this is what I was just told. Like, I'm so out of my league. I have no idea what I'm doing." But he convinced me to go report him, and a few other people from this group kind of helped me report that. And I remember somebody telling me, I have to report this, and you can either report it or I can do it, and it's going to be way harder if I have to do it. And so I remember sitting in a parking lot, in a church parking lot, telling my mom. Shortly after that, probably the next day, I remember driving down to the county sheriff's department, and they put you in one of those boxes. They're like, I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. There's like a couch, I think, in there that I was sitting on. But there was like a glass window in front of me that I assume is what you see in the movies, where they can see you, but you can't see them. And I was just sitting in there with a detective, and started asking me all these questions. And I just started telling him everything that I could remember and everything I could kind of piece back together.
Yeah. And how you said your mom took you, that must have been quite the conversation and convincing with her, I would imagine.
So I've heard a lot of survivor stories. And one of the hugest parts that a lot of survivors talk about is their parents not believing them or the person that they tell not believing them. I just feel so grateful for all of the people that just believed me. I told my mom, and without question, she believed me. So it's my mom's sister's son is my cousin in this scenario.
Mhm.
And we just lived in neighboring cities, very close. We're over there, interacted a lot, but without question, she believed me, and so grateful for that.
Was she suspicious at all, or she believed you because she knew you, to be honest, and knew her son, obviously?
I don't think she was suspicious at all. I think that's one of the things that she regrets the most is not being suspicious or not seeing the clues, and I
Mhm.
think that still haunts her to this day. And that was 20 years ago. Anyway, I remember going to I think the next day, a detective showed up at my house with it was like a group of people straight out of like the movies where they're like setting up, they're like messing with all the wires with your phone and like setting up this probably looks like it came out of the 70s recording device. It looked so big and so archaic. And this is obviously my 20-year-old memory of this. Just this giant device that kind of like connected to the phone that they were going to record the phone call on. They were sitting on my kitchen table, and they had me call my cousin and confront him on the phone. I don't remember anything about that call. I to this day have been trying to like remember what was said and what happened, and but I just can't. I'd love to get my hands on that recording. Anyway, I so they recorded this call. My cousin admitted to it and just kind of tried to convince me not to tell anybody. And so the police were able to use that call, and they went. I don't know if they went that next day or that same day to the camp that he was at, and they arrested him. He was originally arrested in April of 2003, and then he was sentenced in late October of 2004. There was very little in terms of the court proceedings that we had to do. I remember meeting with the DA a few times. I remember I spoke at his sentencing hearing, and then that was the last time I saw him. It had been almost, yeah, I think 18 years, 17, 18 years since that sentencing hearing. And I'd kind of like moved on with my life. And when the sentencing finally happened, I think I was like almost 16 or something like that. And I remember telling the DA, I was like, hey, look, I want to meet with him. I want to talk to him. And the DA was like, no, you can't do that. I guess there was some laws or something that you had to be, she said you had to wait till you were at least 18 to do that. And I was like, all right, fine, whatever. When I was 18, though, like it wasn't even a thought. I think it maybe entered my mind once, but it didn't stick. And so I didn't even think about it until it was 2021, actually. My mom and I were just out to lunch one day, and she was like, "Have you heard anything about like he's?" I mean, it's been a long time. I wonder what's going on there. And I had like tried to Google his name, and apparently I'd been spelling his name wrong the entire time. Totally pronounced the name wrong, and so I didn't spell it right, and could never find him. So I told my mom that I was like, I can never find him. I can never figure out anything. And so apparently she went home from that lunch and looked him up online and found him no problem because she actually knew how to spell the last name. And but he had a parole hearing that was scheduled for a month out. That was going to be his first parole hearing. And I was like, what the crap? Like, what are the odds of that happening? Like,
Mhm. How long do you think you'd been in at that point?
18 years at that
Uh,
point.
Your mom didn't have contact with her sister?
Yes and no. I mean, this destroyed our family, as I'm sure you can imagine. So when he was arrested, his sister, so my cousin's sister, was over at our house and we were just hanging out. And she gets this phone call because the police said, just act like everything's normal. Don't tell anybody. Don't like. So, I mean, they were coming over for something, and I mean, it was pretty common for them to be over at the house sort of thing. We were just supposed to pretend like everything's normal at this point. But she gets a call while she's at our house. My cousin, he's in jail. We got to get him out. We got to bail him out. And my sister, she's like, we know why he's in jail, and like you shouldn't get him out. But they ended up bailing him out, and then he was arrested like literally the next hour or something, from what I understand. They bailed him out, and then they just arrested him on another charge, as they were kind of discovering more things. But that honestly is one of the last memories I have with my other cousins. My mom didn't talk to her mom or her sister. I mean, it was probably, I mean, it was years before they ever talked again. And when they kind of reconciled, which was actually at the death of one of their brothers, at the kind of surrounding that, kind of the agreement was we're not talking about this ever. And so yeah, my mom, she I mean, she does talk to her sister now and have a relationship with her and stuff, but that was a long time coming, and they definitely don't talk about this to this day. So
You have one sister, and he also had a sister. Is there any other kids in the mix?
so he has two sisters, one older and then him, and then one younger, and then I have two older sisters, and then me, and then two brothers. And my two brothers are quite a bit younger than me.
Was he molesting your sisters or other people that you knew of?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I mean, I always wondered if he molested my brothers, which he says he never did. And I believe that. I tend to believe that, given the age difference and kind of where he was versus where they were. And at the time that they were even around, he had kind of already moved away, kind of at the camps that I had mentioned. So he was convicted of molesting, I think, four other boys at that camp that he was a counselor at. And so those are a part of his
Conviction.
conviction. Yeah, thank you. I didn't have the word for that. I mean, I always wonder if there was more boys. He worked at a camp for quite a long time, but I think that might be one of the things that haunts me the most. I never felt guilt for what he did to me, or shame, I guess is maybe the right word, for what he did to me. I mean, I definitely felt a lot of embarrassment, a lot of, I don't know, but I felt a lot of, for years, responsibility for those other boys, because I was the first victim. And I always thought to myself, if I was braver or smarter or something, I would have reported sooner and saved those other boys. But
Yeah. Oh, you cannot beat yourself up like that, Tristan. I know it's hard not to, but it's like they say that, playing Monday morning quarterback, or when you just, all of us get in bed usually at night when it's dark and we're so critical of ourselves. But I mean, we've got to celebrate that you did. I mean, there
yeah,
are people that are listening to this podcast and people out there that never do. And what you've done is amazing, right? You stopped it before it could have really gotten out of control for so many. So you've got to really, really hug yourself and appreciate what you did.
I don't really feel that way anymore, but for a really long time I did. I feel like my story is kind of two stories, if that makes sense. So like there's all that story kind of leading up to him getting arrested and sentencing, and to that day, really just a few years ago, where my mom and I were sitting out for lunch, and then everything that's kind of happened after that point. So I didn't do much healing at all in my younger teenage life or anything like that. I think I did a lot of forgetting and a lot of pretending it didn't exist. I didn't know how to heal. I definitely was not ready for any sort of real healing. So anyway, fast forward, it was 2021. I think it was June of 2021. My mom and I are sitting at lunch, talk about my cousin, and she looks him up, and she's like, "Oh, she called me up, I think that next day." Actually, it was early July, because she called me up on July 4th or 5th, because I remember going to a 4th of July parade thinking about all this stuff. but he had a parole hearing, and I was like, I'm going to participate in that. And so I reached out to victim services and was like, I want to participate in this. And this is still kind of in the heart of COVID-19, where they had kind of transitioned to doing all these parole hearings over Zoom or whatever. And so we did a Zoom. That was at the very end of July of 2021. And I remember, because I was a minor when when everything happened, I was able to participate in the parole hearing as a John Doe. So I had my screen blank. You're not allowed to have your screen blank unless you participate as a John Doe. My name was John Doe on the screen. It was kind of fun. Like, that you go around in the parole hearing and you have to like turn on your mic and say your name. And I just had to say John Doe. But I knew when he heard my voice, he would know who I was. So I'm like, why the freak am I a John Doe if I have to say my name? Like, and that was probably one of the longest days of my life. I don't know if you sat through a parole hearing, but oh my gosh, they just go over every detail of the person's life.
Yeah.
What led them to prison, and I learned so much. I had written a victim impact statement that I had the DA, the district attorney, read, because I was not going to read anything. I don't think I could have put myself together. But I kind of wrote this eloquent letter, in my opinion, that was like 3 pages long, and the DA read that. And at the end of the letter, I decided to turn on my camera and just kind of like face him. I think that was like the first time where like I felt like I had some power over him, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Yes, you had said what had happened to you, and he had to look you would presume, in the eye.
Yeah.
You knew he heard it.
And so I decided I was going to do a VOD, a victim offender dialogue, and that it took almost a solid year to prep to do the VOD. The prep work for that was insanely grueling. I ended up starting to go to a lot of group therapy and stuff like that. And I was looking for groups of survivors of childhood sexual assault of men. And that is so hard to find. And there is not a lot of groups of men that are willing to sit around and talk about their childhood sexual trauma. It's just,
I mean, it's hard enough for most men to talk about their feelings, and then to talk about them publicly, and then to talk about something sexual, and then something sexual when they're a child. I mean, to unpack all that, I can imagine, is hard, but you were able to find.
no, I was never able to find a male support group. I have since then. There's like a few online that I found and stuff, and I found like a mixed gender support group, and I was the only male there. But anyway, so I speed through that last year between 2021 and 2022 in preparation for that VOD. That was just, I mean, that was hell. It was just reliving everything. Like, so much of my childhood memories I've kind of just suppressed and blocked out. And just really that year was a matter of like all of these things kind of just flooding to the surface. And so I ended up doing the VOD in late June of 2022, barely a year ago. And I think we ended up spending like 7 or 8 hours in the prison together.
As you're going through this victim offender dialogue, that this group, HIMSA, they were able to get you cleared to go into the prison. Obviously, your offender has, I would assume, done some kind of therapy on his own to be able to get him to this place, and, you know, therapy on his own, but also with this group. So I think it's very rare, from what I'm hearing in my education, that many of the child predators are not always willing to be accountable for what they've done. You have this man that is accountable. He has come to terms with some part of it somewhere, at least enough to actually sit down with you. So you get cleared to go in. You two are in a prison in California together, and maybe just walk us through that day.
The Ahimsa group, I had gotten in contact with them through the victim services, and then Ahimsa assigned me 2 facilitators. One was recently released person that had been incarcerated, And it was great to talk to that individual because they were able to provide so much context of like, what's the prison going to be like and everything. And
Mhm.
but yeah, so we did all that prep work for the year. They met with me on Zoom and then they met with my cousin on Zoom. And there was a lot of back and forth of like, well, why does he want to meet with me? Well, these are some of the reasons I want to meet with you. And then, yeah, he eventually agreed to meet with me, which I am so grateful for. Cause like you said, there are so many people in this space that don't get the opportunity to have that meeting. I know several people that have been convicted for very long, like sentences for sexually assaulting a family member, and they still deny it to this day. I don't get that when they're literally in prison for that and pleaded guilty for that and then deny it after the fact. Like it just doesn't compute in my brain. Just another thing that I feel so fortunate about is that he has taken full accountability and was willing to meet with me and everything. So I flew into California with kind of this father figure that I had mentioned when I was 14. He's kind of still been with me for these 20 some odd years. And yeah, he was my support person. We flew into California together and stayed in a hotel that was kind of close to the prison. And we drove to the prison.
How old were you now?
So this was just a year ago. So I was 33 at the time. I'm 34 now. We go from reporting at 14, wanting to do some sort of thing like this, to now here we are. Just I think it ended up being 19 years later, where I'm actually getting ready to walk into this prison. Anyway, we go to the gate. Oh my gosh, the clanking metal. I can't like get that sound out of my head. I'd never been in a prison before. And like they check your bags and whatever. And then we were able to bring a lot of food in because we were planning on being there the whole day. And but I just remember like the prison gate opened and then we walk in and then that one closes and then the next one opens. And then after that second gate opened, there was this prison guard. Um, and his name was Joaquin. And he was my buddy. He was assigned to me the whole day. And so
Mhm.
he was with me the entire day. And he was just so awesome. So grateful for him. But anyway, he kind of walks us over to this van, like this 16 passenger type van bus thing. And we ended up driving to a totally different section of the prison. And then we get to this other section and we check in there. And I remember Joaquin pulling out his keys, which is this massive wad of keys, and he just like puts it into the door, and it takes like two hands to open this door, and looks like it just came straight out of a movie. And I don't know,
Mhm.
just so old and clunky, and like all this clinking metal. And anyway, once we're through there, they had us do the VOD in the same room that they do parole hearings in, bit of a nicer room. And they took me into this kind of this room where there was the one-sided glass where I could see him, but he couldn't see me. And my cousin was sitting there in hand. I didn't know this at the time, but he had handcuffs underneath the table. I don't think he wanted me to see the fact that he was in handcuffs. So he just sat there literally the whole time, with his hands under the table. But anyway, I remember seeing him through this one-sided glass and I lost it. I just totally lost it. I was like, oh my
Mhm.
gosh, how the heck am I going to go in this room in just a few minutes and confront this person? Anyway, Joaquin kind of helped me go to find the bathroom, and I went to the bathroom and I cleared myself up and I was kind of like ready to go. And then my father figure, like he kind of coached me before I went in there. And he's like, when you walk into that room, you stare him in the eye and say hello and call him by name, sort of thing. I put myself together and I just walked into that room and they opened the door for me and I sat down and I said hello and I just stared at him in the eye. And it was at that moment that I realized he was way more afraid of me than I ever was of him, sinking in his chair and getting smaller. I At that moment I think I almost had like pity for him. I realized, oh my gosh, like my whole life I've kind of just viewed him as like this horrible monster.
Mhm.
I just have these horrible nightmares of things that he would do to me. At that moment I was like, he's not a monster, he's a pitiful human being. Transformational moment where I was totally changed. My paradigm was just changed. Knowing me, knowing I couldn't talk in that room at first, I had one of I wrote another letter It was, I think, like 2 pages, and I had the facilitator read that letter to kinda start off, which was like, "This is why I'm here, this is what I wanna do, like, this is how I envision the day going," sorta thing, and then I had kinda broken the day up into, several sections, I think 3 or 4 sections, where I was gonna ask him a series of questions, and then I was just gonna get up and leave, and then come back and ask him another series of questions, and then get up and leave, and then kinda do that. And the
Mhm.
questions kinda got progressively, like, harder, if that makes sense. This is totally stupid, and it totally just, like, satisfies my little 14-year-old self, but all I ever wanted as that 14-year-old was to be able to, like, walk into prison, basically say "F you," and then walk out knowing he couldn't come out. That was, like, all I really wanted as a 14-year-old. Yeah, so I was able to do that, I think, 4 times in the VOD. Because I would just stand up, and the second I stood up, there was a guard ready to like escort me out. They weren't in the room with us, but they were just on that other side of the glass. And the second I stood up, they were in there. Like Joaquin and I would just go walk around the yard, the prison yard, and I got to do that like 4 times. It was so great. And during one of those times where I was out, like when the questions got heavier, I'd kind of like sit in that little glass room and just kind of like watch him. And one time he stood up, and that's when I realized he was in handcuffs and he had to go to the bathroom, so they escorted him out to go to the bathroom or whatever. I realized he was a human being. I realized that he was more afraid of me than I was of him. And then another huge part of that day that totally transformed me was I realized he also fragmented his mind and kind of compartmentalized things, and I had so many like timeline type of questions where I was like, when did this happen? When did this happen? How old was I when this happened? And like, even though he was quite a bit older, like he had no recollection really of that. And so many times he had to say, I don't know. And I think both of us, I realized both of us in a very, I guess, like survival mode tactic, just compartmentalized and tried to block things out and forget things. And realizing like he and I were just the same in that sense was, I think, humbling for me. And so, yeah, anyway, I did that VOD that day, and then maybe even rewinding a lot actually. So in the process of getting ready for the VOD, my cousin gets to also choose a support person. And I think he had chose this pastor that actually worked at the camp when my cousin was at the camp. This pastor to me is such an amazing human being because he decided that like, hey, if I don't try to keep in contact with somebody I know who's going to prison, like how can I call myself a Christian? And so he has kind of kept in contact with my cousin since the day he got arrested. And as a pastor, he was able to have much longer visits with him throughout the 19 years he was in jail. And so anyway, I ended up getting in contact with this pastor, and we ended up becoming acquainted. And I one day, in preparation for the VOD, I called him up and I was like, I need to go back to this camp because I have so many fragmented memories of that day or that weekend, and I need to piece them together. And maybe for lack of being able to express experiences, I feel like I was a little kid trapped at that camp in some way. Like my cousin molested me throughout my childhood, but that at that camp I had relived that event, and it was probably the most traumatic for me so many times. Just
Mhm.
over and over and over again, I just relived that event. And I really think there was this little boy stuck at that camp that I needed to go there and like reclaim, if that makes sense. So I was like, "Hey, I need you to take me to this camp." I didn't realize how hard of a request that was gonna be for him because the fallout of what happened at that camp after my cousin got arrested was massive. And this pastor dealt with all of that fallout. And he hadn't been to that camp in almost 15 years because of how just he quit shortly after everything and just was like, I can't do this. And but he ended up calling up the camp and saying, hey, look, this is the situation. Can you make space for us there?
Mhm.
And so we went to this camp the next day. So we did the VOD, and then the next day I went to this camp, and I was able to like be in the room where he molested me the last time. And like I had visions of it, but I couldn't really construct it perfectly in my brain. And it was just, and ironically, they had totally renovated that cabin and it was totally different, but standing there and the pastor kind of described to me exactly how it looked. And I was like, yes, this is definitely the place. And they had this ropes course at this camp, and there was this 100-foot tree that you were supposed to like climb up and then like jump off this platform sort of thing. And then you'd kind of like be lowered down. I went to do that right after he had molested me. And I ended up getting to the top and I was just afraid. I was a kid. I don't know exactly how I was between 10 and 12. Um, and I just remember holding onto that ledge, feeling so afraid to jump over. And then the guy who was belaying me handed the ropes over to my cousin. And I just remember on this ledge, standing or sitting there, really crawling, I guess, on my hands and knees, looking over this ledge and then being so afraid to jump down. And my cousin says, "Come on, Tristan, don't you trust me?" I was just like, what the hell? Like, what? Like, no, I don't trust you. Like, I'm scared of you.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I told the pastor, I was like, I want to climb that stupid tree and I just want to jump off of it. Like, that's all I want to do. Like, I need to like reclaim myself. I feel like I was probably stuck up on that stupid platform. And then the pastor also showed me the very spots that my cousin was in when he got arrested. Um, and I got to like stand there. And one of the questions I had asked my cousin the day before is like, tell me about that day. Tell me about the day where you got arrested and everything. And he kind of rehearsed that whole day to me. And to stand there and then to also have that visual of like, of what happened to him on that day was just beautiful in its own way. That so he got released from prison like barely over a month later. So he's been out of prison for just over a year. I've been able to go inside prison 2 different times to share my story and interact with incarcerated people. I feel like the real healing has really come from seeing the humanity in these incarcerated people. And most of them have committed similar crimes to what I was a victim to. And to see their accountability and their humanity, and in a way to see that we're all just people. We've all made mistakes. Some people's mistakes land them in prison and some don't. I mean, I obviously can't speak for every person that's incarcerated, but at least the ones that I've interacted in my 2 different prison visits, they have this desire to be accountable and to improve their lives and to make the best of their lives from a really bad situation. And a lot of the men that I've interacted with, I mean, they're in prison for the rest of their lives. They're not getting out. Or if they are, they're going to be really, really old people when they get out. And I'm not at all advocating that these people should not be in prison. I have a lot of conflicting views on that in my mind, but and I know that there are many people in prison that are not accountable at all. But to see those that are, and to see their humanity and their desire to try to make some sort of amends from a really bad situation is just, it's humbled me. It's helped me understand a level of forgiveness and peace that I never thought possible. I think the most healing has happened for me from interacting with incarcerated people. I don't know the exact statistic, but somebody told me something like 70 to 80% of the incarcerated men in the CDCR have been molested as children. I don't know if that's true or not. I remember somebody telling me that. I don't have actual data to back that, but what I do know is that finding a support group outside of prison of people that are willing to talk about it is really hard. But like there are a lot of men in prison that are willing to talk about their childhood trauma and how that impacted them healing.
Yeah. It's profound. I mean, that's what led me to where I am now. Being a teacher inside, I was literally blown away by the truth, the vulnerability that someone is able to share after they have done these deep, dark, dirty things and able to own it and have done the work. And the emotional intelligence that I feel with them is what has led me to sit here with you to really show that we're all broken somehow. We're all going through something, and to think that those people that have been convicted of it, and I haven't met, a person that's incarcerated that wasn't a victim first.
Yeah, exactly.
So that for me is nice to be able to hear all sides of the story. But oh my gosh, there's so much to unpack with everything that you just shared.
Yeah.
So when you went in the day and you saw him, who was in the room with you? Did you have your support person from Ahimsa?
So there was my cousin and myself, and we were sitting on like opposite sides of a pretty big table. I think they had like put two tables together to kind of
Yeah.
purposely have some good spacing there. There was the two facilitators from Ahimsa. One who was recent. I think he was still on parole at the time, actually, but he had been in prison, and then another one who hadn't, and they had kind of been working with both of us over that year. And then we were each allowed our own support person. One of the things that I personally wanted to do was to do this kind of myself in a way. It was part of, I think, me reclaiming my sense of self, reclaiming my power. So I was going in myself. I didn't want to have my support person with me, but my support person he came to California with me. He drove me to the prison and he didn't go into the room with me. And then there was my cousin's support person who in a weird sense was also my support person because he was this pastor and I had talked to him a lot leading up to getting ready to do the VOD, and we were all going to the camp the next day. He and I and my other support person were going to the camp the next day. So he kind of became a little bit of a support person for me. So it was really just the five of us in the room at the time.
And are you willing to share any of those questions or what you were feeling from him? It would be interesting to hear what his take on the day was.
Yeah, I wish I knew his take on the day. That I think I had mentioned to you in our pre-call that I really want to do a second VOD. I've talked to several people that were incarcerated over the last year and just kind of getting involved in this space. I've talked to several people that have been released from prison and just how hard that is to navigate. I really want to know that from his perspective. I also just want to know how he's doing, how the VOD affected him. Those are questions that I currently have that I really want answers to, and unfortunately, I don't know if I'll ever get those answers. I personally feel very connected to him. I mean, he's my cousin. Our families were very, very close. I feel like there is some blood connection there that's hard to just sever. I really am very sad that my relationship with his family has been so fragmented over the last 20 some odd years since this. I wish that maybe some of those family connections could be healed in some way. I don't want like a relationship with him or anything, but I do want to know how he's doing from time to time. And I don't know if I'll ever get that. So that was actually one of my purposes in doing the VOD, is I felt like if I didn't do it, then those family relationships would for sure be gone. I was also especially mindful of my mother in that I was afraid that when my cousin got out, that her relationship with her sister would become more divided in some way, and because they've done a lot of work to mend that relationship and to be sisters again. And I was just really afraid that when he got released, that work that they've worked at would be gone. And I felt like there was some element of if I could reach out and offer some sort of connection with my cousin, that might preserve my mom's relationship with her sister. That was important to me. So I asked a lot of questions just about his family and stuff, and unfortunately there was a lot he couldn't answer because his family his parents have been very supportive of him, but his sisters have for the most part disowned him. Which is ironic because at the beginning they told me how horrible I was for reporting this and getting him thrown into jail. I would love to reconnect with his sisters. I just don't know how that would ever work and how that would look. And I was hoping that doing the VOD would help with that. But I don't know. That was a part of it, is just that family connection is important to me, and I wanted to do that in the VOD. That was I think one of my first goals in doing the VOD. I wanted to know what life was in prison. I've learned so much about prison life and how easy it is to get contraband and like all these things that I was like, I thought that was just in the movies. Like, it's just, so hearing some of those stories is just like, wow. So I wanted to talk about those because I had heard some of those from his parole hearing, and I had some questions about that.
And just not to mention, there's so much that happens that no one ever knows about. It's sensationalized in the media, and there's lots of truth there, but then there's a whole other story and a whole other reality that just is not public.
Talking to a lot of the recently released incarcerated people that I've met over the last year, and just hearing some of those stories from them,
Mhm.
I'm just like, wow, I don't have words. So I wanted to ask some questions about that. I also wanted to just know about his childhood. One of the huge questions that I have that I don't think I'll ever have an answer to is what led him to do what he did. I don't know if he knows. And that was humbling to me to realize. And because it wasn't just me. I mean, there's those 50 or whatever counts that he reports of molesting me. But then there's all the other kids. And he also got very heavily involved in child pornography. And I just feel like you have to be really, really hurt and sick and something to get to that point. I still really want to know. I don't think he knows, though. So I don't think I'll ever have an answer to that. I think I mentioned earlier in the call, I had a lot of timeline questions, like what the heck is going on in my past. I have this like giant piece of paper that I've tried to put together over the last several years, where I've like started at my birth to my current age, and I'm like just trying to fill in all these gaps that I just can't seem to figure out. And I was hoping he could help me fill in some of those gaps.
You also brought up a question that couldn't get myself to ask you, was think that this potentially happened to him.
That might be one of the very last questions I asked him before we left. And I wanted to like do this build up where I've kind of like broken down some barriers. So I've asked him like easier questions about his family, and then they got progressively harder. And one of our other cousins, who's I think older than both of us, actually, he swears up and down that my cousin admitted to him that he was molested when he was a kid. I mean, there's a lot of rumor and speculation of who that was. There's maybe even two people that my other cousin says molested my cousin that molested me. So there is that, and he denies that. But at the end of the day, like, is that really going to help me if I know that? Like, is that going to help me put more sense to this if I know that? I hate with so much, there's hate that people who have been molested are oftentimes accused of being of molesters themselves. I mean, I think for a huge part of my teenage life, like that was one of my biggest fears, that I was going to become my cousin because of the societal rhetoric of, oh, if they were molested, they're going to molest somebody else. I take that very, very personally because, I mean, that's me. I was molested my whole childhood, and according to what society says, like I should go out and molest other people. And like, that's definitely something that I personally have not processed yet. So it's very raw. I don't know how to talk about it. Whereas everything else in this call that I've talked about, I feel like I've processed.
But that's also something that's accusatory of you, that is potentially sensationalized, but then is put upon you. Those stigmas are out there, but by you talking shows that, look, no.
And you say that, but like for me anyway, that is the current thing that I like right at that wall where I'm like, yeah, I've processed a lot, especially over the last 2 years in preparation for the VOD and this year after the VOD. But I think have that childhood fear of, oh no, I'm going to become a molester myself. I mean, just for the record, like I've never molested anybody. And like for some reason, like I don't know if somebody's told me that or anyway, so maybe to fast forward back to this question that you asked about my cousin, like if he were to admit that, yes, I was molested as a child, and that's one of the reasons why I molested you, like, I feel like that would almost like fuel that insecurity that I have a little bit, or
Oh,
that
I
thing
see.
that I need to process. There's a huge part of me that like wants him to say, yes, this is what happened to me. Cause it would like give me something to hold on to of like, okay, that's why you did this to me. Well, I mean, cause he started molesting me when he was like 14 years old, I think. Like he was young and that lasted through his 20s. But like by him not saying that and he actually like very vehemently denies that he did that, that almost gives me like a sense of peace. Like, okay, this isn't a perpetual cycle that I have to break. This is just an isolated cycle. Like,
Which makes a lot of sense. There's, what they call intergenerational trauma, which in your case, there is potentially there's one to break, but hopefully we'll get a chance to talk to him and see where he is with that.
part of me thinks that, like, if he was ever molested, and I put a big if there because he denies it so vehemently, and I feel like there's a part of me that really wants to trust him with that. I don't actually know if he even remembers. Like, he's done the same thing that I've done where he's compartmentalized, where he is, I think, forgotten a lot. At least that's my experience from talking to him. Yeah, there's a huge part of me that believes that if it ever did happen to him, that he legitimately doesn't even remember.
And I think the other part to that there a gain for him, who knows, in discovering that, right? Considering he has to then deal with the trauma that's happened with you and the other boys. So where did any of the other victims come forward?
That's the thing is all the other victims, I mean, this happened at a youth camp, a Christian youth camp where he was originally arrested. So obviously they're talking to the pastor, like they had to tell all the parents for every year that this person had worked at this camp. They had to tell all these parents. They had to interview. They had to. I think my cousin admitted to the ones that he was prosecuted for, and
Mhm.
so I think it was more of a direct thing. To my knowledge, there was nobody else that came forward. Were there others that my cousin doesn't even remember about? There was a pretty long gap of his life where he lived at those camps. And if he was molesting me on a monthly basis for so many years, I mean, did he just get his fix with like child pornography? Because the other boys were not nearly as frequent and stuff. I think two of the other boys lived at the camp with their families or something. So there was a little bit more frequency there, but not nearly as much. And so I just always have to wonder, like, were there other victims that my cousin doesn't even remember?
It would be interesting to compare the chart that you talk about in your house, looking at your life and his. How similar is it in his life where he doesn't have those chunks of time accounted for?
I would imagine there's a lot of those, and I would imagine that a lot of offenders, I would imagine that there's a lot of that throughout all of their experience. I think that's one of our shared human defense mechanisms.
Are there certain triggers that you have to live with today because of the trauma that was inflicted on you for so long?
I don't generally care what people think about me as a person, but for some reason in the back of my mind, I always wonder, like, do people think I'm molesting my children? Because
Oh,
I was a victim. I've been very, very open about my past over the last couple of years. That's been one of the things that I've tried to do
mhm,
through kind of preparing for the VOD and going to the VOD. And so I've been very, very open. I've only ever really made two social media posts in my whole life, and both of those are about this. One
mhm.
of them I wrote I think it was the day my cousin got out of jail, or the day before is when I posted it. And then the other one was right after I got out of the prison the first time. I mean, those are just public posts that anybody can see, and they're pretty lengthy posts. So I've been very, very open about it. I still have this fear that I don't really know how to process, of are people afraid that I'm molesting my children? I didn't so my oldest child is 9, and I didn't give them a bath for the first probably 4 or 5 years of their life. That was just an arrangement that my wife and I had. I just wasn't gonna give my child a bath. My second child, who is 4 now, I had kinda made this, like, mental commitment of, "'Kay, like, I'm gonna be a normal parent. I'm gonna help out with baths." But, I mean, the a lot of the molestation happened in the shower for me, And so like that's just been a huge processing point. And still, I mean, I have a 4-year-old son. I think my cousin says I think I was 3 when the molestation started. Like my 4-year-old son is around that exact same age. And there's just a lot there that I don't even know what is there, if that makes sense. I just feel it there. And I just
Mhm.
don't know how to digest it and how to like think through it. And I know it's just kind of all this connected, like a lot of it is I think that societal aspect of it that can't seem to really wrestle with. But yeah, that's one of the things that I struggle with a lot to this day. Intimacy obviously is hard. It's become a lot easier. When I was very first in an intimate relationship with my wife, she would tell me that I would like literally go curl up in the ball in the closet after having sex, or I would go to the bathroom and like lock the door and curl up in a ball in the shower and just cry. I don't have recollection of those. I was in my 20s and I don't have recollection of those moments, which goes back to me saying at the beginning of this call that like I have been so good at compartmentalizing things and forgetting things. And so like I have like this vague memory of this one time curling up in a ball in the closet, but like it's so like almost watching myself do it. Or I'm not even experiencing it, I'm just watching myself do it. Luckily, I haven't done that in several years, probably in the last like 5 years. Yeah. There was a time where we lived in a condo community, and a neighbor who I knew decently well, one day his door was just knocked down by the SWAT team and he was arrested and all his computers were taken. Apparently, he was molesting his children and distributing child pornography of his children. This was, I think, about 5 years ago. I don't think I had sex with my wife for 6 months after that. I just so much like trauma, so much reliving everything. And like that's the last time I remember like going into the shower and just like curling up in a ball and just like crying after sex was around that time. I also get into these compulsive scrubbing the shower moments where I will literally just like in the shower scrub and scrub and scrub and scrub. In my teenage life, like I had my own bathroom and we only had 2 showers in the house, but my mom was nice enough to like respect that. I'm very grateful for my mom for allowing me to have that space.
I think a couple things that I'll walk away with uh, was for you being at that camp and you being able to have the wherewithal to know that you have to go back there. And I think of it as more of like a clearinghouse. Like I've got to go to that point to clear it out for me to able to move on or let go of what's happened to me in the past. And just like you said, just looking up at that tree with that platform on it and standing in that place where he did that to you. I mean, Tristan, that is putting your feet to the fire and living it all over again. The hurt you had from such a young age to be able to hold it at that moment. I think it's just beautiful to see that you can heal yourself. And then along the way, you're healing, so many of us, me in particular, who haven't, had that experience. Why was he found suitable? Do you know?
I'm so mad about this. Still to this day, I believe it is probably a good thing that he is out of prison. And I do not believe he will harm anybody else because he has to wear an ankle monitor bracelet for, I think, the rest of his life. The odds of him hurting somebody else with an ankle monitor bracelet on him is pretty low, I think. So he was originally sentenced at 20 year. Well, it was a 25-year sentence where 20 years was supposed to be spent in prison and then 5 years out on parole, which is what he's doing now with an ankle monitor bracelet.
Hmm.
But then he was also sentenced for the child pornography charges, which I think was another like 6 or 7 years. So I think altogether I had 32 years where he was supposed to be in prison. And so in my mind, like I had another 12 plus years from that parole hearing. There's some law in California where if you were under the age of 26, you're eligible for some early parole. I'm not 100% sure on the logistics there. And when that law went into effect, he qualified for that because he was, I think, 20. 5 or something when he was arrested. I can't remember his exact age. And so that's what the parole hearing was. I don't think he was even supposed to ever have a parole hearing other than for that law, because he was just supposed to have a terminal sentence. And so they actually found him not suitable for release at that parole hearing, and they denied him parole for 3 years. But because his sentence was a terminal sentence, that ended a year after that parole hearing. Unless he did something really stupid in prison that added time, which I don't think was possible at this stage for him, he was getting out in a year no matter what.
You, as a survivor victim, you can't get a hold of him, right?
Right before he got released, I had a very long conversation with his parole officer.
Mhm.
And so I have his parole officer's phone number saved, and I can give his parole officer a call if I ever need to or whatever. But no, I'm legally not allowed to contact him. And that's one of the main reasons I really want to do that second VOD, because that's the only way I can legally contact him. Like, I don't feel like I need like another 8-hour sit down. I really just want like an hour, go out to lunch sort of sit down. And that's the only legal way I'm allowed to do it, is through the VOD program. From what I understand, he lives in I don't know what they're called, a halfway house or rehabilitation house, or yeah, I think originally like he was guaranteed a job for like the first 6 months or first year or something. I think he's in there for 5 years for the duration of his state parole. From what I understand, that could be extended for the state parole, but he's not allowed to leave like the county that he's in. He has nieces and nephews now. He's not allowed to see them until they're 18 years old. Even though I was so mad that he didn't end up serving the sentence for the federal crimes for the child pornography, because I guess his lawyer somehow made it so he served those concurrently. That federal sentencing gives him parole for life, which is where I was told that he might actually have the ankle bracelet on for the rest of his life, and that would be monitored by the feds. And so, like, that was kind of nice to hear, actually, because that just makes it seem like the odds of him ever hurting another child. And I alluded to in the call earlier to feeling somewhat responsible for the other victims. That was actually another huge reason why I wanted to do the VOD. I wanted to like stare him in the eye and say, "Don't you dare do this again to another person." Like, I just think that would crush me. I don't know if I could handle that. I know I wouldn't be responsible for that, but like, I don't know if I could handle that. I wish this was a crime where I could just like separate myself from him and like we live our two distant lives on different sides of the world sort of thing. But like, because he is my cousin and because my mom has a relationship with his mom, and because I feel like he was such a part of my childhood, like I just can't seem to let that go, if that makes any sense.
Not only is there what happened with you, but then there's the intricacies of a relationship within a family, and that he is your family member. And like you alluded to early on, blood. So here is this person that you were taught to always love and be close to and supposedly trust. But then there's this whole layer on top of it. So there is that natural family connection of, how are you? Are you being responsible? Right? I know you. I know you growing up. I know you're all family. I know all the meals we share together. All that communal life that is the same. And when as we get older, there's not that many people that actually hold those intricacies that close. So there's probably that layered in there, as well as just simply a family member.
The more I recite my story, the more I realize that there are just these little things that like I still hold on to that I can't seem to figure out, if that makes any sense.
So did you take anything away from the VOD from him?
Absolutely. I took that he's a human being. I took that he's more afraid of me than I am of him. And I feel like I was able to reclaim my power.
Which I think would be for people that may be listening, or people to know, is that there might potentially be some healing in finding the person that is responsible for what they have, like exactly what you said, have taken away from you.
I've talked to a few people that have done surrogate VODs. And for some of them, it really satisfies. anybody that I've heard that has done a surrogate VOD where the crime has not been from like a family member, that has been very healing. But anybody that's done a surrogate VOD where the offender was a close family member hasn't been as healing for them, it didn't satisfy them.
And it's not as impactful, and they don't get out what they were hoping for or be able to, all the things that you experienced. They potentially don't get that power back. They're not able to look them in the eye and tell them where they are and what happened and have that kind of healing for you or just closure. But I think what's important to share with our audience is that our hope during this podcast is to have both the survivor and the offender talk. And in those cases where they're not accountable, or in this case, may not want to talk, we can find someone and interview someone who has been incarcerated or is currently incarcerated and has inflicted the same kind of crime.
That's one of the reasons I've really enjoyed going inside the prisons. That's a big deal for me. And
most people are afraid. And
Yeah,
it's so you to think that you've had this trauma that has reconstructed your whole life and you're willing to walk in there. And I've been there, with you, and it's that Sally port, and you have this big metal gate open up and you are put into this cell alone or with one or two other people. And then the back door is shut on you and you are there. And then once you're let into that place with those ginormous cement walls and guards with guns down on you, and you're walking, hanging out with convicted people incarcerated. Yeah, it's daunting. Most people I know won't do it. Yeah, and one thing that I enjoy when I'm in there is that typically the men that have done the work, and I don't have as much experience with women, but I've sat with lots of them, but the men typically call them Mr. or Mrs. and often bring about their name. So they really want to give credence to that person and hold them on a pedestal, and very much are living an amends to that person and what they've done to society as a whole. Well, I so appreciate your vulnerability and you talking with us today, Tristan. It's been an absolute joy. I mean, I feel honored to be able to hear your story and you share it with us. So thank you.
Like I said, I enjoy telling my story because it adds to me. I feel like I learn more about myself from doing it, and I have no expectations for this. I honestly feel honored to be a part of it.
If there's one thing Tristan's story makes clear, it's that healing isn't a straight line. Sometimes the moments that bring the most clarity happen in the last place you'd expect, like a prison visitation room. From the shadows of his childhood to the moment he locked eyes with his perpetrator, Tristan's journey is one of courage, reckoning, and unexpected kind of healing. He's learned that closure isn't about forgetting. It's about facing the past, owning his story, and refusing to let it define his future. Thank you for being here for this conversation. If Tristan's story resonated with you, or if someone you know needs to hear it, please share this episode. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Until then, be kind to yourself, and remember, your story is yours to tell.